Hi, welcome to Mary's Eclectic Interests. I'm Diana Rogers. We're going to talk about fairy gardening today, something that I love and do frequently in my day-to-day world. Fairy gardening, or also known as mini gardening, is the start of an adventure that can span multiple generations. It's very calming. It can have a very calming effect when you go out and take a look at your garden after a hard day at work. It always puts a smile on your face. It will reflect the personality of the creator or creators. So it can be a grandparent and a grandchild, or a parent and child. It can reflect multiple personalities. It's amazing how much fun fairy gardening can be across the generations, or just on your own if you want a quiet, peaceful place to be. So what are the types of fairy gardens? You can have a fairy garden outdoors, or they're also known as mini gardens as well. You can put them outdoors in with a regular garden, or have a special place. For example, around a tree, up against a fence. All of those places can be very special. It can be small or large. It can be very simple, or it can be very complex. And also know that they tend to grow over time. Literally, the plants that you put in there will grow, and generally the space that you have assigned for a fairy garden will also grow. You can have multiple structures on it, or it can be just a very open place where fairies can play in the playground or just have a place to frolic. The base that you have outdoors can be anything from stone to grass to moss to mulch to sand. Anything that you have will work, and you can build your fairy garden or miniature garden on that. It can also have a water feature in it, which adds a sense of calm too. Maybe a river or a fountain, or just a simple bird bath will add that to it. Fairy gardens and mini gardens can also be done in planters. You can have that planter indoors or outdoors. They can be small, they can be large. You can recess them down into the ground, or you can have them set on top of the ground or on top of your garden and have it be a focal point. When you're putting those out, consider where you're going to put them. What you put in your planter is determined by where that planter is going to be. So if it's going to be in sun, you're going to want to have things in that planter that can take the sun. Same with shade, if you have it in a shadier area. Large, round, deeper pots can go amidst your perennials or amidst your annuals. Whatever you want to do is just fine. We're going to talk a little bit right now about some design components, things to think about when you're putting your garden together. Now I'm going to stress right off the bat, whatever you do, whatever is pleasing to you is perfect. You don't have to worry about remembering all the things we're going to talk about, but just know that there are some specific design components that you can think about when you look at your garden and say, something is not quite right, or I've got an empty space over there. What should I do with it? Okay, so the very first thing we're going to talk about is scale. And what scale is it's the relationship between all of the different pieces that are in your garden and how it looks overall. So the pieces of the entire area need to be in proportion to each other. Here's an example, okay? So you take this fence, okay, and you put your fence around your fairy garden, okay? Then you want to put in a watering can and some tools. Okay? Now these look like they fit really well together, but look at this. If we take and put a wheelbarrow in there, it's off. It's not quite right. These tools would never fit in there. So instead, we would need to take tools that are proportioned or scaled appropriately for the garden that you're building with all of the components. Okay? Now, if you look at this, and we've got the smaller scale wheelbarrow here, and we take this away, and we take this away, and we add a chair, notice that the fence that looked too big really is good now. It works well. So having things to scale is very important, but it's also okay to have a few pieces that are bigger that work well. On the contrast, here's a wheelbarrow that if you put this in here and next to the chair, it's going to be way too small. Going bigger is okay. Smaller, things tend to get lost and look very much out of proportion. You don't need to measure. You can just kind of eyeball it and see. It's very clear that this doesn't fit with that wheelbarrow. You can see that with your eye. So just, again, take a look at it and make sure it's pleasing and very, that everything is proportioned right. What most of our gardeners we find use is what's called a medium scale. And that means it's 1/2 inch to the 1/2 inch and to a foot in real life. So it's, that's kind of some way to take a look at it. This, the fence, and this are the bigger pieces, so those would be considered large. And then you get into something like this. It's, oops, I'm sorry. This one is considered extra large, okay? But again, keep in mind, bigger on some pieces is okay. Smaller tends to get lost. All right, so let's talk now a little bit about color and contrast. So color can be any shade of color that you want in your fairy garden, or it can be a shade of a color, or it can be a true color, all right? So you can put true colors in there, shades of colors. Adding bright colors also, for example, underneath a green hosta plant really brings things out. So then we go to contrast. So color and contrast work together. So if you've got this, for example, and I'm going to poke some holes in my display pieces here so we can put things up. Okay, so this is a piece of greenery that's kind of spiky. It's light green. It's got kind of a fuzzy texture on it, okay, versus something like this that's a little bit more rounded, a little bit more like a boxwood kind of a look. So you've got different contrasts here. So not only do you have a height difference, but you also have a texture difference as well. And here's a third one. You've got thin, and the middle one is a little bit thicker, and this one is more of a tree look, and it's very loose. Okay, so by doing and taking all of the contrast pieces into consideration, you can make a very pretty, pretty fairy garden as well, too, with your greenery. Also, take a look at this, how much brighter, how much different your tree pieces are going to look when you have something bright in front of them. Okay, same thing over here. You begin to think about that, and this one maybe would go to the side because it's a little bit shorter. Right? So you've got your contrast and you've got your color all in there. Would also be fun to have your chair, for example, here, and then maybe have some color riding right through it. Okay? So again, anything that you want to do with your color and your contrast works really well, but just kind of keep in mind all of the different things that you might want to put in there. And again, these are silks and plastic flowers or plastic plants. I don't do a lot with real plants just simply because they're a lot harder to deal with, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. We will be right back with more. Hi, we're back. So we've been talking about contrast and form. Notice the contrast if we add a light color bench in front of the darker color greenery and on a green moss. You can see how the bench really stands out. That's very important too as you're moving forward with creating the garden and moving things from place to place. Combining tall things and short things, it's always important also to make sure you have enough height in your garden and not just have it very, very low. Let's talk a minute about texture. Texture is something that the eye sees and the fingers feel, but not necessarily because you touch it, okay? So take a look at this. So this is a wall. You look at that and your eye sees the stone. And at some point in your life, you have touched stone. So you know instinctively what stone feels like, okay? Same thing with this table and chairs, for example, okay? You look at this and it's a cute flower petal. So you don't even have to touch it to know that the texture is soft. It's not really because it's actually resin and it's hard, but it looks and feels soft. So if you think about combining textures that are hard, solid, maybe even cold, if you will, along with textures that are smoother. Same thing with this. If you were to butt this wall, for example, up against that tree, so we've got the tree that has very soft leaves to it and then a harder, more solid wall, you can see that the contrast is there. So you can use texture, hard textures, soft textures, or you could use it, excuse me, with foliage. Here's another way to take a look at it too. So you're going to use the foliage, which is soft. You're going to use the stone, the wall, which is hard. And then you put a chair in here. So when you think of a chair, you think of sitting in it comfortably. So again, lots of different combinations. Here's another piece. You can do a hard wall and a kind of a bristly feel with your greenery. Okay, stick this in here so you can kind of see what that works like. And again, it's your eye telling your fingers or telling your touch what it should be feeling. Okay? And then through all of this, we can add a sweet little fairy who has a cute little skirt on, and you've got a great little scene. Again, texture, color, height, and depth on all of those. Repetition is another form that you can use in your fairy garden to draw the eye through the fairy garden. And again, these are all design components that folks who work in gardens and architects use. So you can take and do some repetition. So we're going to put one here, and we're going to pretend there's a pathway out there. So 1 and 1 on each side. So you've got the repetition of the benches. They're not exactly the same, but they're the same color, the same size, and kind of the same look. And you can see that your eye goes from one to the other here. So the fairy is trying to figure out where she wants to sit. Okay? Focal point. Now the focal point is also known as the centerpiece, or the place where your eye goes initially. So if you're looking at this, for example, the center point is really this bench because it's enough of a contrast, and your eye goes there automatically. It's important when you're building out your fairy garden, or any kind of a garden for that matter, to have something that the eye can really focus on. Same thing here. I would say this one, the centerpiece, is the fairy that's standing in the middle of the benches. It's often a unique piece. It's often the piece that most fairy gardeners start with. So whether it be a structure, a house, a fairy, as in this case, a birdhouse, as in this case, or a bench, it's the piece that you're drawn to, and that's a good place to start. We're going to talk about how to start a fairy garden in just a little bit. Layers is another important thing. You can see the layers here. Layer does not necessarily mean smallest in the front, largest in the back. It's more about the look of the garden and having various heights so that the eye is drawn, rather than having everything be really flat. Balance, remember, you can't have all of one item. You can't have 10 chairs and tables and chairs in your garden. There's no balance there. There's nothing more to look at once you've seen it. So remember, balance in the garden. If you get too much of any one particular thing, too many fairies, for example, or too many houses and not enough other pieces, you're going to have a garden that doesn't really feel balanced. So look at it, eyeball it, and say, is this really the balance that I'm looking for? Okay? Now, where do you start? So, a couple of tips for you. Start small. Don't think you're going to do an 8-foot fence and do a fairy garden along that 8-foot fence by 4 feet deep. Start small. Start in a small place. Get the feel of it. Understand what your interests are and how things kind of fit together. Find that special piece. I talked about that just a minute ago, that special piece, whatever it might be for you. It might be a house. It might be something you already have. It might be a teapot that's a favorite teapot of yours that you want to incorporate into your fairy garden, or a cup and saucer. Whatever you want, start with that and build around it. It doesn't mean that that's going to always be the centerpiece, but what it means is that's the place that you're going to want to start to build out your garden. Okay? Remember, your garden is never done. A big garden is never done. A fairy garden is never done. You're always going to want to add pieces or change pieces or move things around. You're going to want to bring most everything that you have in your garden in the fall. We're in Minnesota, so definitely October, November, bring it in, clean it up, put it away in a safe place. Get it clean and dry and put it away in a safe place. And then when you go back out in the spring, it's like a brand new garden. You unwrap your pieces and you don't put them in always in the same place. Okay? Having a plan really helps. figuring out not just where, but how big you're going to want to have it. What do you want in it? I want a house. I want 2 houses, whatever it might be. Have a plan. It doesn't mean that you have to do that all at once, but have a plan. It's not necessary, but it really is helpful because you actually, whether you put it on paper or you just put it in your head, you will sort of have a plan and an idea so that when you go to the store and you look for pieces, you will kind of know how they're going to fit in. You can pick a theme as you're planning, or you don't have to have a theme. I like eclectic. I like to pick what I like, not necessarily everything fits together beautifully or it's perfectly symmetric or anything. I personally like eclectic. Some people want to do themes like woodsy, for example. You want to have all things woodsy looking, or rustic, or maybe realistic. You want your houses to look real, like they would look in your neighborhood, versus something kind of quirky like a gourd house, for example. You can do fantasy, enchantment. You can do all things quirky. You can do all of your houses or all of your fairies to be very enchanted looking as well too. Or you can do something in the modern metal place or modern metal theme as well, where everything you've got is more metal. It's bright colors. It's again a little bit on the whimsical side, but more metally. You can have a theme, or you don't have to have a theme. Either way. Okay. Materials that are used in fairy garden items vary from vendor to vendor, from person to person. Things that you can build are generally built out of stone or rock, wood, those kind of things. You might get into doing some plastic things, but typically what you are going to see is things that are made of resin. Now what resin is it's basically a plastic, but it's a really hard plastic. This bench, for example, is resin. It's really solid, it's good outdoors, it retains the color because they color the resin before they actually make the product, so it's not painted, for example. So resin is great. Most of the houses that I'm going to be showing you in a little while and different pieces are made of resin, and they are great for outdoors, but again, they need to be brought inside for the winter and cleaned up. Wood is another product that's often used. Keep in mind, wood over time will fade. It will also deteriorate a little bit. So it's important to make sure that you coat it with some kind of a spray coating, clear coating, something that will keep it fresh and looking good outdoors. Metal, as with anything else, metal will rust outdoors. So again, you're going to want to put on some sort of a coating on it to keep it from rusting. This piece right here, for example, is it's a wood piece, but it's also got a little bit of resin in it as well too. Okay, I think we're going to take a quick break. We will be right back. Hi, welcome back. Before we get into actually making some fairy gardens, which we will do in our next session, I want to talk a little bit about some of the tools that you're going to need. Don't go out and buy anything. Most of this you already have in your kitchen or someplace in your house. One of my favorite tools is this. It's an old-fashioned potato masher. Many of you who are younger maybe don't even know what one is, but it's great. Because what you can do with this is when you've got a bowl or a planter or whatever, even outdoors, and you need to tap your soil down, this works fabulous for it. We'll use it a lot when we get into building out our fairy gardens. So this is one of my favorite pieces. Two favorites are a spoon, a big spoon that I can use for dipping things or putting soil in or whatever it might be, and a fork. You would be amazed at how much you use a fork. For example, if you're trying to put in moss, you can poke it down. If you're trying to make a hole to put a fairy in, something that's on a stick, you can push this in and get it in there really easy. So again, for a big spoon and a regular fork. Scissors are always good if you're going to be cutting moss or cutting things. That works out really well. You'll need one of those. And a wire cutter. Now these are good because if you're going to use silk flowers, you're going to want to be able to cut them down to the size that you need them for a stem. Or if you have a shallow, either of these are a little bit more shallow for a garden, you're going to probably want to cut off some of the stake also. So good wire cutters is a very good thing. Wire is also, this is floral wire. Whatever gauge you want to use, doesn't really matter. It's great to have around, so if you have to tack anything down, whether it be outdoors or indoors, this works really well. Use your wire cutters, cut a piece, bend it, and tack whatever in. I discovered this about a year ago, and it's the best thing too. It's an awl, and I don't even really know how to spell it, but what it is it's a pointy tool that if you, and you saw me using it a little bit earlier, if you've got a piece of greenery or a fairy or something you need to stick into a basket that you don't have soil in, or even if you do have soil, you can use this to poke a hole and kind of keep track of where that hole is and then push it right in very easily. So this awl is great also to have. That's it for the tools. So again, don't go buying anything because you probably have some or most of this already in your house. I'm going to switch gears just a tiny bit and let's talk a little bit about different categories of things that you can put into your fairy garden. Arbors, trellises, fences. Okay, so if you have a fence, we showed you that a little earlier, you can make it very defined. Same thing with an arbor. So if you've got an arbor and you put it in the front, it's an entryway into your garden. Bridges, water features, fountains, bird baths, those are all really important. Every garden, I think, needs to have some sort of a water, something. It's very soothing. You don't literally have water in your bird bath like this, for example, but you do have the sense. Again, it's your brain telling you what to feel when you see this. So some sort of a water, whether it be a fountain or a river or a bridge that kind of gives the connotation of water, all of those things are very soothing in your garden. They'll put a smile on your face every time you look at it. A door, if you are getting into fairy gardening and you want to put a door or put a garden around a tree, for example, it's fun to have a door right up next to the tree that goes into the tree, right? And you begin to use your imagination about, wonder where that door goes. So think about that. They also work good in a retaining wall. Put a door right up next to a retaining wall, and what you will find is you begin to think and have stories about where that door would go. Fairies are always very important. So some people need to have or want to have fairies in their garden, fairy statuettes similar to this, you know, little ones. Some people choose not to. Some people choose to not do that fairy and let the fairies just come as they will. So fairies are important. You can put gnomes in your garden, dragons, trolls. Limit the trolls. Those guys are really mischievous and they get us into all kinds of trouble, but they're fun to have in your garden too. So houses, every fairy, every troll, every gnome needs a house. So be sure to include houses or some sort of a structure. It doesn't have to be a house. It might be a shed. It might be a tent. It might be a lean-to that you've made on your own. Mushrooms. We all know that mushrooms grow in the woods, and a lot of where the fairies live are kind of in that woodland kind of a look. So mushrooms are good. Pathways and walls and stairs, things that will lead the fairies to the next place. Or as you look at it, it will lead your eye to the next place that the fairies are going to be, or to the next house. It can get to the point where you have an entire village or an entire neighborhood or a full big estate. But pathways and trails are very good to keep the eye moving. There's a lot of mini garden accessories that you can put in too. Things like this, a birdhouse, for example, a gazing ball, signs. Signs are really important. It helps welcome people to your garden. It also will tell, like a street sign, it'll help the fairies figure out where they want to go. There are signs that say no trolls allowed, for example. Okay, so those are all good pieces to have into your garden too. The tools, if you're going to have a garden, a garden area in your garden, you're going to want a wheelbarrow. You're going to want to have tools in there. You're going to want to maybe have a watering can. Anything that you would normally put into a big garden, maybe a fence around it. That would all work really well too. And again, these are just ideas of things that you could put in your garden to help spur the imagination on for you. Weather vanes also. Which way is the wind blowing? A sign or maybe a little chime would be fun in your garden as well too. All of those things are fun, they're great. Again, back to the original recommendation, start small, let it grow over time and build. I'm going to show you some gardens now. Give me just a second here. I'm going to push these things away a little bit. I'm going to show you some gardens that I built that, and then kind of tell you a little bit about them. okay? We're going to build in our next section, in our next time together. We're going to build some gardens, but right now I just want to kind of show you. You kind of saw how I put some things together. This is one in a twine basket. It's got a liner in it. It's got soil all in the bottom. Now I don't have any real plants in there, but it does have soil as its base. What I did was I picked a house that I like, and I got something tall. Now, I put the house and the tall kind of just back from the center, and then I put gnomes in it. This is a gnome house. That's what it says right here. It says gnome male. So then I put gnomes in it, and of course, if you have gnomes, you have to have lots of mushrooms. I've got moss on the sides and around back, and I'll show you the back in just a second. But down through the middle, I have the cocoa mulch so that it looks like this is kind of in a driveway kind of an area or an entryway area, and then the moss is more in the dirt. Now, I told you I put the house a little forward of this, or a little back of the center, because I wanted to also build out the back. So this is more of a three-dimensional or a 360-degree house. I've got the mushrooms and the house all front, but notice in the back I've got another troll, and he's out looking for flowers in the woods too. Okay? You can think of a lot of stories that you can tell with a plant like, or a basket like this with your gnomes in it. Okay, let me grab one more here. And keep in mind, fun things are to take them to work with you. Put them on your desk. Let your friends see what you've done. Let them share in the excitement of, and the story of the fairy garden also. Okay, so here's another one. This is just in a pot that has a faucet on the top, and it's very simple. It's a house, it's a fairy. I did it primarily in purple, my daughter's favorite colors, and you can tell here. But I did it primarily in purple with the house, the ivy house, the door opens, a little bit of greenery with some purple on the end, our fairy, and then a little bit of purple here, as well as a gazing ball. So there's something like this you could take and sit on your desk at work, and you know what? Every time you look at it, you're going to smile. It's just, it's a lot of fun. You'll get a lot of comments on it. Here's another one that's kind of fun and interesting. I found this container down here at a thrift store. So you never know where you're going to find things for your fairy garden. This container literally came from a thrift store. I think I paid a couple of bucks for it, but you can get anything there. And then I put a bike, a pedestal, and a fairy sitting on the pedestal, and then also a little bit of greenery and flowers, again, to add some additional color to it, but keeping in the theme of the pink and the greens in there. Okay. One more I'm going to show you. This is a great one for the office. Okay, right here, pull this back. This one I call my beach bowl. You can do a fairy garden very easily in a terrarium type bowl. This is a beach bowl. You could take this to your office, and wouldn't it be fun if you had a little rake in there that you could sit and just kind of rake things around. When things get tough at work, you can just kind of play in your garden, okay, and stick that in there. Fun things to put. You can do so many things. Your imagination is the limit, and there is no limit to your imagination. Start with one thing and then figure out beyond that how big you want it to be. These are just some very straightforward ideas. I have a lot of friends and a lot of customers who have shared pictures. You can go to Pinterest. You can find all kinds of wonderful, fantastic ideas on how to put it together. So next time we get together, I am actually going to build out 4 or 5 different fairy gardens for you. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.